Welcome to our closing plenary here. And what we're going to start off with is just some highlights from the room facilitators, the lead facilitator in that room, who was trying to capture at an aggregate level what was happening in both of the discussions, and they're integrating them. Just to be aware, every table facilitator is writing up detailed notes, and the summary that you get from us will have all of that detail attached. We do aggregate things, however, because we appreciate that a decision-making document gets pretty concise in the end of it. So we'll give you a page or two that's a summary, but the rest of it will be behind with the detail. So I'm going to hand the mic to Yulia. She was in the sustainability room. Matthew will report from the mobility room. Ian will report from complete communities. We'll wrap it up with partnership. And then I'm going to open the mic to the floor in case anybody has something additional that they want to reinforce or add if you hadn't heard it yet, for example. And for folks that were here in the morning meeting, I'm going to defer to people who are speaking who may be new to the afternoon meeting, if we can. But doesn't mean we can't make it around for as much as we make the mic move around the room as much as we can. And we're going to wrap up. I'm going to take a sort of a temperature on how you're sitting with the types of questions that Waterfront Toronto asked you at the beginning. And if you've learned a lens on this project or learned something about the project that you didn't know before you got here. But we'll do that in due course. So I'm going to hand it over to Yulia for some highlights from the sustainability discussion.
Okay, thank you. Our afternoon sessions were fantastic, a lot of great feedback, so thank you for all of you who participated. We had a very good mix of local residents, those who are keen and follow sustainability trends, as well as developers and industry professionals. So very good mix of opinions. In general, I would say it's very consistent with what we heard in the morning. Generally, everyone is supportive of sustainability and resiliency solutions that are being proposed, with some questions and concerns. Number one is also consistent with the morning sessions, metrics and science. And when we talk about metrics in science, it relates both on how Waterfront Toronto evaluated the solutions that they deemed worthy to support, as well as looking into the future that because it's a test bed, we need to make sure that the metrics in place are properly tracked and it's actually clear what the net benefit is moving forward. We talked a lot about the need for better education and awareness, again, just like you heard in the morning session. We heard that information is a little bit dense. It's a lot. The discussion, guys, is dense. It's a lot. And so, in fairness, it was hard to discuss any meaningful or particular feedback in that sense. We also talked about the importance of behavior change and human behavior because solutions for sustainability are only as good as they can be followed and implemented. And so one suggestion was maybe perhaps using real-time data to either incentivize a certain behavior or, I guess, use punishment. Yes. We did talk a lot about the scale and the scope of the solutions in a sense, are we doing enough? And is what is being proposed enough? Is net zero enough? Or should we really be taking this opportunity to push for net positive? And I think also consistently throughout the sessions, one thing we've heard is that it's important to recognize that a lot of the proposed solutions are not new. Passive housing exists, timber exists, a lot of the things exist, and the real innovation would be to implement it and build it in such a way that fosters stronger communities, more resilient communities, and communities that can rely on each other. That's it.
Great, thank you very much. Okay, let's hear about mobility.
So we were in, as Nicole said, we were in the new mobility room. Again, quite similar themes to what we heard this morning. There was quite a bit of support for a number of the proposed solutions. Some people saying they liked them all, other people identifying certain ones they particularly liked and would like to see prioritized. With that, also a desire for more detail, more granularity in terms of the solutions themselves, people saying that that would allow for more informed feedback related to those, especially the ones they consider that they like, but they'd like to get some more information. Also, kind of related to that was a red flag on blanket language around leaving it up to the private sector to figure certain things out. Really a desire to see guidelines, guidance from Waterfront Toronto's and others in the public sector related to that. There was also the importance of safety, and would like to see even more detail on proposed solutions related to safety and promoting safety, and more solutions in general related to safety. Transit was something we heard about. Connecting the LRT, wanting more information about that, but also the importance of having this area connected to the broader network through transit itself. And the LRT came up several times. Also, a question generally about how will people be able to take advantage of some of the technologies and digital solutions proposed if they don't have a smartphone? So are there opportunities for people to still take advantage of those if they don't necessarily have the technology in place? And those were, and also similar to this morning, using the site as a pilot to test ideas that could be used outside of this area in Toronto and beyond as well. And those are kind of the general areas that we talked about in our room.
Okay, thank you, Matthew.
Okay. Complete communities. So probably the biggest topic that we discussed in complete communities was affordable housing. There was some support for the affordable housing solutions, but again, echoing earlier in this morning, I think generally the tone of the discussion was that people were hoping for more or more ambitious affordable housing proposals. There was interest in seeing more for families, artists, youth, more options and different types of housing. So whether that was co-ops, co-ownership, or multi-generational housing, that was something that we heard a lot about. One person said technology is all well and good and nice, but affordability is really what we should be prioritizing here. There was also some support for some of the other solutions, ones around the civic assembly and the digital mapping, the real-time digital mapping network. At least a couple people said the idea, they understood the rationale for excluding the raincoats, but like the idea of some kind of weather protection, and said it would be worth continuing to pull the thread on that. Back to affordability for a second, we did talk a bit about who defines affordable housing or how affordability is defined. A couple of folks suggested over the course of both the sessions that instead of measuring affordability against average market rents, maybe we should be using incomes instead in the city. One person said that, and I'm going to do my best with the math here, but 15% of what's being proposed, you would have to have an income of $54,000 a year to be able to live in that affordable housing. And so they said in their estimation that does not raise the bar in meeting our affordability challenges. Third category of conversation that we had was around financing. There was a question for Waterfront Toronto to reveal what we can do with Sidewalk Labs versus what we can do without them. So what is it that Sidewalk Labs is uniquely getting us in terms of financing with this project? They also suggested that Waterfront Toronto might want to convene a panel of experts, similar to how it's convened at a digital strategy advisory panel, to give input on the financing around this project. There was a third suggestion around financing that says we saw in the overview presentation that $1.2 billion did a lot of work or has helped a lot with flood protection. It would be nice to see a similar level of investment in affordable housing if we were as serious about that as we were about flood protection. The fourth and final theme of what we talked about was around inclusivity and the partners. So there was a suggestion, this is a couple of quick points. One person suggested that the Waterfront Toronto should be seeking Indigenous consent, not just engagement on the project. There was a lot of questions about when we talk about inclusivity, who is this for? It would be nice if someone could reveal really who we're trying to attract or build this kind of community for. A desire to see a little bit more in terms of community benefits. And just to segue into the partnership, we had a range of opinions on that. On one side, there were some who said if you're looking to foster a community of inclusivity, there were some strong concerns about choosing Sidewalk Labs as a partner, since its sister company and parent company have a record of trying to silence dissent within their own community or their own company. So they suggested that They were concerned from an inclusivity standpoint. Then on the other side, there was, not on the other side, but a different perspective was that Sidewalk Labs has come to this with a lot of what they considered to be innovative proposals, and they were open to seeing continuing the partnership explored. So that's a bit of what we discussed.
Thank you, Ian. Okay, so we'll wrap up with what we were talking about in this room, so partnerships, digital and economic development. And I think, again, similar to this morning, there were certainly some strong voices supportive and some strong voices with concerns. I'm going to flag what some of those were, and then some areas to consider moving forward. So on the supportive side, there were participants who said they had an appetite for experimentation on this site, support for Waterfront Toronto leadership, but make sure the right safeguards in place, make sure Waterfront Toronto gets it right. They mentioned that this process built trust. Previous process maybe lost some of that trust, especially with the overreach on what some considered an overreach on the proposal, but this process has been building trust. They are interested in seeing a strong role for Canadian companies and risk and worry about a lost opportunity. Those are the folks that thought that made positive sort of comments. On the tough side, there's a concern whether the appropriate public controls are in place to ensure control around data, management of digital, ensuring anonymity. Found the information a bit hard to digest, as sounds consistent with what you talked about in your room there, Yulia. A bit vague and high level, and then in some places not detailed enough. And that's something we heard this morning. Some places it's too much, some places it's too little. And I would say there's been a consistent discomfort from some people in this room about around data and more details required. Then some folks saying, look, this should be a decision about whether to move forward, not how. And some people got the impression that this was now moving to a how. And then specifically about Google and Sidewalk Labs, question about whether we need Sidewalk Labs, or was Google something of a Trojan horse in this regard. So those were the sort of big plus and negatives. There were cross-cutting. It was interesting on the innovation front. Some folks said the innovations don't go far enough. And others said, actually, they go too far and we're not sure if you'll be able to implement them. So a bit of a different perspective on those. There was interest in how the wealth from this project will be distributed, and specifically looking to who gets the jobs, where are they from, and very strong interest in transparency around money, transparency on controls, transparency on consequences for inaction, and transparency on the rationale behind Waterfront Toronto's decisions, which is, I think, something they've been attempting to do through the meeting today. So what I'd like to do is, we've got about 15 minutes left. I want to take just 10 minutes, and we've got 3 roving microphones. Yelena's here, I'm at the front, and Blair's on the side. Big hand up right on the side there, Blair. Maybe we get it started, and then Yelena will, and then we'll move to the front with me. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. There was a comment about, there was a comment that solutions are nothing new in relation to this, and neither are its technologies. If you look in the Waterfront Appendix number 3, you'll find an EMF scientist appeal. All this data share you're talking about, all these devices and products and services are carried by the millimeter wave, as this entire city. In that appendix, the third appendix of the Waterfront Group, within that you'll find the peer-reviewed science on the millimeter wave within all these devices and technologies. My question would be, have we looked into the advance, what the emission and radiation to all of this is going to do to us in the future and in today, and for all our children and coming, in relation to that, millimeter wave, what people call 5G. The difference with 5G is it adds a microwave component that we've never had before. It has radiation emission. It's carcinogenic to all carbon-based life and all living organisms. 2,600 scientists from around the world, including U of T professors, signed that document in the Appendix 3 for the Waterfront Group. I suggest you have a look before we go any further with this. And that's the biggest elephant in this room, and it's amazing you guys don't speak about it. I find that distasteful.
Just to, before I go to the next, Yelena, you've got somebody there. Just before we know, we had some great data from the UN that you provided that we put into the appendix from the first round of consultation. If folks want to see more detail, there's a link. Okay, next person there.
Thank you. And yes, I'm still here. I was here this morning. You know, I'm very, very happy to hear people talk about affordable housing in the city and the need for affordable housing. We all know we have a housing crisis, and I you know, bet that the majority of your kids won't be able to afford to even rent in the city of Toronto close to the central business district in the future. The thing that I want to raise here is the following, that it has taken us 3 years to get to this point where we are today, to discuss 144 somewhat vague ideas about would be nice to have this and that. At the same time, we have a lost opportunity here. We're sitting on a property, a piece of land, a 12-acre site that is worth 500 million or 590 million. We have asked a land economist to tell us how much affordable housing could you build if you would actually leverage this piece of land. The answer was that you can build 2,500 to 3,500 affordable housing units with that money if you would sell this land to a, you know, to a vendor and invest that money. Now, if you would leverage this land and you get a mortgage, you can triple this number up to 7,500 to 10,500 affordable housing units. The project that we're talking about today has no numbers attached to it. When I asked, I was told we're talking about 600 to 700 units. And I'm just trying to say that we are losing an opportunity here. We are discussing ideas that have been done elsewhere. There's little innovation here. And Waterfront Toronto has done a perfectly good job that we have seen from the presentations along the waterfront in the past. Very, very sustainable developments, innovative developments, with the input of communities. And here we are, 3 years later, a process that has been highly, highly problematic. And we're still discussing whether it would be nice to have, you know, heated bike lanes and, you know, green roofs. So, you know, I just wanted to point that out, that there's a cost associated to this. And I personally don't feel like using Waterfront Toronto as a vehicle to lobby other levels of government for funding for a $1 trillion corporation to develop our waterfront. Thank you.
Okay.
I've been here since this morning, and I have to say I'm a bit more optimistic than I was when I first got here. I just want to say hats off to Waterfront Toronto, because I think this has been a very difficult process. When we first were approached in our neighborhood in the St. Lawrence that you would like to explore something different with Quayside as opposed to the other precinct plans, this was very bold, and it's doing exactly what you said you wanted to do, is to be addressing the big issues that are coming up that are impacting all cities. So we're not there yet. We have not, the St. Lawrence neighborhood has suggested to Waterfront Toronto to carry on and do your work. We have not decided yes or no as to whether or not you should still continue work with Sidewalk, but we think you should still continue that process because you walked into that process with the RFP, and you owe it to yourselves and to the city to get through that and figure out what will happen May 20th. I am hopeful that we'll have a decision that will get us on our way to being a much bolder and more recognized city for something very positive. I think for us, we see it as an opportunity for us to be a leader in the world for how we build complete communities. Change for a lot of people is very difficult, and I know that there's a lot of people that are upset with how we got to where we are. But the process has been clean. I've never seen so many audits in my life to check and recheck the work that all of Waterfront Toronto has done for the last 3 years. I'm starting to get fatigued. But when it comes to change, incremental is easy change. And I think what we're looking at right now is transformational, and we need that to get to where we need to go.
Thank you. Okay, next person. Go ahead.
Hi.
And then Yelena. Yeah, and then here.
I'm concerned that after 2.5 years, we're still talking about icing and not the cake. We're talking about whether building raincoats are trip hazards when the whole financial arrangements are completely vague. I would really like to see Waterfront Toronto convene a panel of experts in municipal finance to before even looking at the deal that's on the table now, to ask whether $600 million worth of land can't be used for better purposes than supporting the shareholders of Alphabet. Maybe all of it could be for housing, etc. and that we also look at the finances of this particular deal. Who finances what? Who gets paid back and how? Who will end up owing money to whom? Will the city end up owing money to Alphabet? If Alphabet is going to invest its own money without asking for a return, then how will it recoup its investment? All of that is still completely vague and undetermined. If these questions, of course, should have been answered before any kind of agreement to go ahead from the RFP was ever happened, and it's outrageous that we still have to ask these questions.
Okay, next question here. Comment or question?
Thank you. Now, I want to take a step back and have us consider if Toronto is to be seen as a leading light and as a beacon of innovation around the world, is this the best that we can do? Are we, for example, attracting or repelling innovation by vilifying? Now, obviously, we do require checks and balances. It is entirely part of the process to validate, revalidate, have these discussions. But I also detect should we call it stench of vilification in the process. And my invitation is it possible for us to be a little more humane in the process and view this in a more holistic way, so that we attract more world-class organizations into our community, so that it creates more jobs, it actually changes the affordability equation. Thank you.
So I'm just going to jump in and address, I'm just going to reframe a little bit of that final comment. Are we attracting or repelling, I think is where we'll leave it. I'm not sure that referring to the stench is the kind of respect that we're hoping to set as a model of discussion here. Joking aside, there have been some very divided opinions, and we've worked very hard to create the space for people to feel safe speaking up. So I'm just going to make that flag there. So next question, Yelena, and then we'll go over to Blair. Sorry about that. Go ahead.
So I'm a person here who is concerned about the affordable housing issue as well, and I think that 20% affordable, especially the way affordable is defined, is woefully inadequate for this project, given the crisis that we're facing in Toronto right now regarding housing. I think we should maybe look at this with using some of the language that's used around energy use, net positive and sustainable. If we were going to make a net positive impact on the housing problem in this city, we would have to ensure that much more than 20% of the housing was affordable, because many more than 20% of the households in this city of Toronto need affordable housing. So if we're going to be net positive, we have to get up to a much higher level. The other thing is the issue of sustainability. Given that only 20% of the housing as proposed would be affordable, and presumably that housing would be sustained as affordable, but that means that the other 80% becomes less, and as part of the community, means that the rest of the community becomes less and less affordable over time. So it's not going to be sustainable. Even if we get some level of affordability, it's not going to be sustainable as an affordable community over time. Now, it was actually me who mentioned the $1.2 billion, and maybe we should be putting that much money into housing. That might seem like pie in the sky, but we should keep in mind that in the 10 years between 1985 and 1995, we built in this province 70,000 units of affordable housing in a 10-year span. That statistics comes from an article in the Toronto Star about the resignation of Sean Getz-Gadden from the City of Toronto. But so that's the kind of thing we've done in the past. I just want to close with one point. We should be targeting the housing here to the income segments in the city. 20% for the lowest 20%. 50% for the lowest 50%, and not more than 1% affordable only to the 1%.
Okay. Great. Blair, you've got a comment there, and then I'm just going to transition a little bit. Go ahead.
Good afternoon. My name is Eric Davies. I'm from University of Toronto Forestry. So I came here to learn about the green space, and I guess the thing that I've discovered is that the more I look into this, the more I see the opportunities going from green space into community housing, and I think, like this gentleman said here, the value of innovation. I do hear a lot of these comments about sustainable housing, but I wonder what the overall value of bringing all these experts together, if we find a synergy that creates a greater value at this landscape. And I guess from my lens, looking as someone who's an ecologist and into green space, I see a lot of positive opportunities here for working together and bringing experts like this. So that's just my perspective at this point. Thanks.
Great. Okay, so what we did this morning, Brendan, if you could cue up the first slide, we just went and asked people to give us their blush, get the temperature of the room. We know there are plenty of people not in this room who also have thoughts regarding this project, but we just want to take the temperature of the room. And we did have some feedback about this morning, and it is very tough in a public consultation environment to both extract the best qualitative feedback, the comments that you're making and the rationale behind them, and at the same time have some kind of quantitative idea of how many people have that position. But we don't live in a tyranny of the majority, so if a couple people think something, we also respect and understand where those folks are coming from. So we're trying to find a balance between quantitative and qualitative. This is really just to get a blush on the room. Take it for what it's worth. I'm going to ask you, do you think the innovations raise the bar on meeting the urban challenges discussed today? You think they really raise the bar, they somewhat raise the bar, they don't raise the bar, or you're unsure or unclear? Give it a click. Okay, somewhat raised the bar. 43 of the 90. I know we started the meeting with 150 or 130 or so there's always a bit of an attrition. 23, they really raise it. 20, they don't raise it. 4, unsure, unclear. Thank you very much. Let's go to the next one. Do you think Waterfront Toronto has identified sufficient controls to manage risks? Number 1, the controls are sufficient. 2, the controls are somewhat sufficient. 3, controls are insufficient. Or 4, unsure, unclear. Okay, we've got 17 thinking they're sufficient, and we've got the bulk of the people, looks like here, between somewhat sufficient or insufficient. And this is a little bit different than what we heard this afternoon, and as we know, this morning. And as we know, Waterfront Toronto does have a number of next steps, and this kind of feedback helps inform their next steps. Next question. Do you think Waterfront Toronto has appropriately prioritized solutions for public investment? First one, solutions appropriately prioritized. 2, some solutions are appropriately prioritized. 3, solutions are not appropriately prioritized. Unsure, unclear. Based on the reports from the room, we've heard already about unsure and unclear, especially from the partnership room, but go ahead. Okay, pretty even split there with the, well, except, so no, not really even. The first one, are they appropriately prioritized? Certainly got 14 folks. Some or not seem to be where the bulk is, unsure and unclear. So we have heard this afternoon in particular about the need for, well, there's either too much or too little information, and the need to, for Waterfront Toronto to do some work on how to make sure that the public understands what is up for public investment, how much that investment is, into what, demonstrate that that's good value. Last one, last but not least, just because we want to understand, I don't think that people come to public consultations to learn only from the person that invited you or the organization, Waterfront Toronto. One of the reasons we set the room up this way is because we expect people to learn from each other. You might not be aware of the consequence of a particular move or the perspective of your neighbor that you're sitting with, so we always ask people, did you learn anything new during this meeting from a participant, presentation, discussion that helped inform your perspective on this Quayside project? You can select all that apply. Yes, I learned a lot. Yes, I learned a little. No, I didn't learn anything. I would like to learn more, or I'm not sure. So over to you. Okay, that's nice. For me anyway, I think it's nice when people learn stuff. Learned a little. No, I didn't learn anything, not too many people, and I'm sorry about that, but it means you're probably pretty up on the project. I would like to learn some more. George, you got some folks, and unsure, nobody. So we're going to wrap up. What I'd like to first do is say the Waterfront Toronto team has been at this since 8 a.m. this morning, and so I just want to give a good round of applause for their effort in order to put this on. We have had an outstanding turnout. When there are 300 people in this room at 9 a.m., you know you've got people's interest. I was worried at 1:30 we might not have anybody back. We've got at least 150 people in here. So a big applause for you for investing to share your perspective on this project. Some love it, some are frustrated. Regardless, you came. That's super great. Thank you. And big thanks to the team of facilitators that were here. They were working hard at your tables. Some of them do this because they do it on a part-time basis, and they know exactly what that role is, and we are very proud of their work. So I'm going to leave it at that, and thank you very much. It's open until the end of the month, March, for feedback. If you have any written comments, leave them at the registration table on your way out. George, you want to say anything? Just a second. We might get another thank you.
That's exactly what you're going to get. Thank you, and have a safe ride home. Thank you.
Thank you very much.